I'm Julie Barkey with this Senate update. The bill that provides funding for early childhood through high school education was debated and passed by the Senate on Wednesday. The budget target of the omnibus E-12 finance bill includes an additional $365 million above base level funding. It also includes a 1% increase to the per pupil funding formula each year. Some members said this wasn't enough, while others said it's a very good bill.
It's unfortunate that in a piece of legislation where in the first year of the biennium we're spending $17 billion, and in the second year of the biennium we're spending nearly $18 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, that when universally across the board everybody is saying, let us have some money to do our day-to-day operations in these schools. And the Senate budget bill only finds 1% to put into the basic funding for the schools. And ironically, we put almost double that in an increase in the department's budget. Automatic increases. Almost double what we're putting into the basic funding for the schools. And I could almost guarantee that every single member in this chamber has heard from their teachers, their school districts, their school board members, their superintendents. This is not enough under the basic formula. We can't get by doing this. This is going to affect our day-to-day education of the children. And yet, we turn around then and we create mandated spending. We throw tens of millions of dollars, and we had the opportunity here in this chamber to say, you know what, maybe we should let school districts keep their nose above the water, and let's put that money into the basic funding. Let's give them that 3% over the course of 2 years. This body rejected that. So we take that money and we mandate how they spend it. It's optional if they want to do it or not, but if they want to do it, we tell them, here's how you spend the money. You don't get to run your day-to-day operation. You don't get to put this into your general fund. You don't get to lower class sizes. You don't get to increase teacher salaries. And in addition, we create $712 million in the tails. Money that we're committed to spending out into the next budget. When we have a $2 billion surplus, we can only find 1% for basic funding for schools. What are we going to do when we've got tails in this bill alone pushing $1 billion? The HHS budget has got hundreds of millions of dollars in tails. The other budget areas are going to have tails. What are we going to do when we're already committing to spend that kind of money, and when in a year where we're flush with cash, we can only find 1%? Madam President, it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate that when we have so much flexibility, we don't have a $6 billion deficit. I get when you have a multi-billion-dollar deficit, we can only find 1% on the base. That's the best we could do. You know, when my side of the aisle was in charge down here, I get that. But when we have a $2 billion surplus, and we're throwing all this money into $17 billion in this budget, it raises the question of priorities. What is our priority? Is our priority to grow the system? Or is our priority to do a good job in the classrooms that we have? And it seems, with this budget proposal, we want to grow the system. Because the efforts to put resources into the classroom and to give those school districts the flexibility to meet their needs, it's not in the bill, and the efforts to put that into the bill have been rejected, both in committee and here on the floor. And that's just very, very, very unfortunate, Madam President.
Senator Westrom. Madam President, members, Senator Uyghur, I applaud your efforts on the education, and certainly have appreciated working with you, and appreciate the small provision for one of the districts I represent on the border being included in this bill. And I know you've got a tough target, and it's tough to meet all the challenges. And so I appreciate that. Members, I echo what Senator Nenow talked about, and I really never thought we'd get to this point with a $2 billion surplus with such just a meager amount on the formula that's in this bill. And so, Senator Uyghur, I know I've talked to you personally about this, and I'm very hopeful and optimistic that conference committee we can find a way to raise this formula, because I think 1% is not sufficient for our schools, for our teachers. And listening to the input from the superintendents, teachers, and the school board members, I think we need to focus on the core infrastructure, trust our schools to spend the money that we can give them on the formula the way they most need it. And so, members, I hope if this bill passes out today, we can see a bill that has a higher formula increase in it. You know, you think of back to 2003 and 2004, Senator Nenow, whoops, I better not look at you. Senator Nenow, we actually delivered, if I recall correctly, a 4% increase each year to the school districts, yet we had a $4 billion deficit, $4.3 billion if I remember correctly, under Governor Pawlenty, Republican majority in the House, a Democrat majority in the Senate. We were able to scratch out 4% increases on the formula those years with a massive deficit. Several teachers that have come through this spring and other groups have said 1% when there's a surplus like this, in deficit years we'd get 1 to 4%. Can you not find a way to help preserve our current structure? And so, members, I think as we make tough choices, expanding the system is a laudable goal in areas that you can have results and achievement. I talked about the Browns Valley initiative that's in here, and they found great success in focusing on special needs children by bringing them in at preschool, and they've worked to try to fund that because of the need that they have. But other districts tell me they don't have the space to bring in all-day preschool. That isn't a high priority in their district, but adequate class sizes, adequate compensation, just keeping up with the maintenance of their existing buildings with declining enrollment. Those are some of the priorities I also hear about. And so I stand up to advocate strongly that we focus our priority on per pupil formula increases, to give our schools, to trust our schools with the dollars that we can give them that are flexible. And it's kind of like in 2008, I remember different businesses, different families were, lots of things were being invested in, expanding, and all of a sudden the 2008 economic crisis hit us. And all of a sudden all these expansion plans were put on hold. And in many cases people were just buckling down, trying to keep their existing business, their farm, or their family intact as much as they could. And that has to be the priority sometimes. You can't keep expanding the system and underfunding the core of K-12 that we know is so important. And I worry about that as we keep expanding. We just expanded to all-day kindergarten this biennium. But last biennium, it was at the expense of the formula because there's only so many dollars to stretch around. And so the formula increase in the last two, for this biennium, from the last budget, wasn't very big either because of all-day kindergarten getting funded. And so if we're going to continue to expand the system, we know the demand in 2 and 4 and 6 years is going to be great and greater. And we're having trouble funding the formula with more than 1% in either the House or the Senate this year per year. And so, members, I rise to raise the dire issue of funding the per pupil formula with a greater percentage increase. We were able to find 4% and 4% back in 2003 and 4 when we had a massive deficit. Senator Uyghur, I know you've got a tough task, and I'm happy to help in any way I can, but I want to speak up for my school districts and so many of them that we're all hearing from that say just get us a 3% increase on the formula. That gives us the most flexibility to deal with the dollars, with the issues that we feel are most important in our districts, and that's what I hope we can come out by May 18th with. Thank you.
Senator Stump.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Madam President. I wasn't going to say anything, but I really think that it's important to look at what we have in this bill. And first of all, I want to thank Senator Uyghur, who took over a challenging committee and did, I think, a very excellent job. An enormous amount of bills that have been introduced. Maybe all but one of them was heard. Senator Han, I'm sure he'll get your bill will get a hearing soon. But I want to give a perspective. I took over chairmanship of that E-12 committee in 2002, and there were a lot of tough times between 2002 and 2009 when things started turning around. We saw probably some of the worst economic times that I can remember. And I came here in to the Senate in 1983, and we had some extremely tough times then. We had, I believe it was 7 special sessions in about a year and a half. And that wasn't very much fun. We borrowed from many different sources. We cut budgets continually, and so I don't want to go back to those kind of times. I think this session, by increasing the reserve, I think that's a very important thing. I think we need to be aware that those times can come back. But when I came into this session, I looked at the education challenge as trying to figure out how we can fix some of the problems that we currently have. And had meetings around in my district. People were talking about the facilities problems out there. And the results of that committee that met for about half a year and came up with a way to try to figure out how to fund facilities apart from the 25 largest districts in the state. The rest of our districts didn't have a way really to take care of their facilities. That became the #1 position that MSBA and the rural school districts wanted. That was a fix because we hadn't equalized those tools basically to help those districts that didn't have the resources. Another one was back in 2011, we had passed, well actually I'll go back a little bit earlier. When Governor Pawlenty took over as governor, one of his primary education goals was what we called Q-Comp. It actually became performance compensation. And I wasn't necessarily in favor of it back then, because one of the challenges was I saw districts that would develop a plan, some very small districts that would develop a plan, and that plan got denied by the department. Other districts that would come in with an almost identical plan, and that plan got accepted. And I looked upon the Constitution dealing with our responsibility for educating our children as one that should be available to all students. And I wasn't successful at that. Even when I was chairing the committee, we were not able to repeal that at that time because enough districts, basically 40% of the students in the state, were in districts that had what they call Q-comp funding, which comes to about $260 per pupil. But in 2011, we passed another piece of legislation that required the teachers' evaluation and development. And that was an important piece of legislation, hard fought over, but it became law. And then the responsibility of the school districts was to evaluate their teachers and to try to give them support and become better educators. The problem is that we had about 40% of our districts that received the money for that evaluation and development and support. The other districts did not receive that money. And so in this bill, you have a proposal that moves the opportunity for all districts across the state to receive those dollars to help with that program of evaluation and development. Another problem that has developed is one relating to licensure. And I know Senator Clausen has worked very hard on that issue. It's across, the majority of Minnesota has a shortage of teachers. Some of it is a result of young men and women not seeing the teaching profession as a very rewarding, both financially and emotionally satisfying career. That, I think, has a number of, came about in a number of different things, but the point is that our districts are short of teachers, and we need to figure out how we can encourage some of the best across the state to become teachers. And this bill tries to address some of those things, and I believe the policy bill has language in it to try to make that change. So I really see this as a proposal that moves us forward in addressing and fixing a lot of the things that have come up over the years. And when you talk about early childhood, I don't think there isn't a year in the last dozen years or so that we haven't heard from people saying that we have to start with our children at an earlier age in order for them to be to reach their maximum potential. And it doesn't matter who they are, we need to do that. And this is one step, I think, a little bit closer to helping those youngsters, our children and grandchildren, to become, to have a better education and to overcome some of the difficulties that we find in our society today. So I hope that that most of you can vote for this. We don't know what will happen in conference, but I think Senator Uyghur, you've done a good job.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam President. As is often the case here, this becomes one of those bills that many times you find the things that you like, and then there's things that you don't like. And I just want to comment today that the career and vocational training part of this bill, in which I spoke earlier, is an important part to me. It is something that I have dealt with extensively within my district. And as I mentioned before, I thank Senator Uyghur for including it in the bill. You know, at the end of the day, I do intend to vote for this bill, but I do so with serious reservations. I talked earlier about the issue as it relates to the 4-year-old pre-K. One of the things that I did not mention is that as we look at this program, quite frankly, Madam President, there are many of my schools that do not have the room that is necessary to add another grade level into their system. As we look at I talked about earlier about it's my belief that this funding that has been provided is not sufficient, and that the school districts will need to dip into their other reserves if they wish to access this, and also the serious problem I believe that it presents to the other preschool programs that are currently available. And the other thing that I am concerned about is that the legislature has a really good habit of starting these programs on a voluntary basis, but just sort of providing that as the gateway to eventual mandating. And I think if there's anything that I'm hearing from my schools that I've argued for in our committee this year, it's that we have to get off of this habit of doing that. And we have to get out of this habit of continuing on with these programs that are voluntary, but somehow eventually down the road they become mandatory. Our schools cannot afford that. As we look at one of the concerns that I have with this bill is indeed the tails that it includes. We talk about a $2 billion surplus, and right now we're fortunate to have that. But let's go back over the years and let's talk about 2011 when the legislature came in and they were facing a substantial $6 billion shortfall. That's not the only time this state has faced a shortfall. I was elected to the city council in 1984. I believe Governor Perpich was governor then. And all of a sudden, we were looking at cuts in local government aid. Why? Because the state had a budget shortfall. And so the more programs that we put out there, the more programs upon which our districts become reliant for state funding, the greater risk we place them the next time we have a budget shortfall. And you know, it would be nice to think that, oh, there aren't going to be those kind of shortfalls again, but it really isn't probably quite practical to really plan on that being the case in the long term. And so I would, as I stated, I'm going to vote for this bill, but I do so with great reservations. And another reservation that I have is, even though my schools have asked me to vote for this because they do want the school facilities funding, I wish to remind them that under the Senate version of this, is that why there's only 1 or 2 schools in my district that actually get any extra aid as a result of this bill. Yes, they do get, all of them get permission to raise their levy, but there are very few of them that actually get any aid from the state of Minnesota to help them pay the bill. And so if this actually becomes the law of the state, I urge them to exercise great discretion and great caution as they go out. And I know that there are certain things that they need to do and that they need to be able to do in the repair of their facilities. But I expect them to have great disclosure as they approach their taxpayers with their decision to go ahead and expend these funds. And so as a result of that, I will vote for this bill today. But I will continue in committee and on this floor to be a great advocate for the fact that we need to get to a point in time in this system where we provide the necessary funding to our schools, but that we also then get off of their backs with the additional mandates that we try to create, and that we oftentimes do create, and trust them. We have managed in one way or another to suck a lot of available money out of the formula and away from their ability to meet the needs of their individual districts. We need to trust our school boards, we need to trust our teachers, and we need to ask at the end of the day, what does this do for our kids, the children for which we care, the children for which we are trying to prepare to have a good future? And if in reality we shortchange that future because of new programs that we keep trying to add to the fold, then we have to question, are we really doing the job that we should? Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sieben.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What a bill. I want to thank Senator Uyghur for his good judgment, his keen insight into the needs of children across the state. He has taken more pressure than anyone this legislative session, and he has done amazing work in putting together a bill that's not only visionary, but funds important needs. I have been and will continue to be a huge supporter of early learning. I read some of the remarks from U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, who was in Minnesota yesterday. He basically said that Minnesota has the opportunity now to be visionary, to leap from near the bottom to near the top in providing opportunities for all Minnesota children to have access to early learning opportunities. That's the vision that Governor Dayton has articulated, and a vision that is contained in Senator Uyghur's bill. All children, regardless of income, and including middle-income children, deserve the opportunity to learn and thrive and be ready for kindergarten. My school district, District 833, the one that I graduated from, the district that my oldest child now attends, and one of the 4 school districts that I have the opportunity to represent here in the State Senate, does amazing pre-K work. My next door neighbor and the neighbor across the street and 2 houses down send their 4-year-olds to the schools, to the school district's pre-kindergarten program. The kids ride the elementary school bus. They go 5 mornings a week to learn how to line up, sit, crisscross applesauce, and learn their letters and numbers. They play. They learn to get along with one another. They get support services like special education if it's needed. There's a wait list to get into the program. Low-income families in my district don't pay, but most parents pay tuition, much like parents used to pay for all-day kindergarten before we fixed that in 2013. My point is, this is a highly successful preschool program. It's giving access to kids, not just some whose parents can afford it. The school district is subsidizing the program because it believes so intensely in the results. Senator Uyghur's bill provides more money for early learning opportunities like this. It's based on the results of districts across the state of Minnesota who have results that show it helps kids develop emotionally and prepare for kindergarten. This is one of the visionary approaches of Senator Uyghur's bill that I appreciate so much. It will move the needle on the achievement gap, and it will help literally thousands of Minnesota children get access to 4-year-old preschool. Let me be clear, I strongly support the direction Senator Uyghur has taken under his legislation. Yet I want to speak and give voice to some of the concerns I've heard from my district. The budget target that this bill received made it very difficult to reach a high enough number to increase the formula more. The formula for the public is the increase or decrease that schools use to set their budgets. To avoid cuts that will impact school districts like mine in Senate District 54, I'm hopeful that we will reach higher targets in conference committee. I rise to give voice to those parents, my neighbors, and the teachers who are pleading with us to find more resources for our public school system and who want more support for their needle-moving, high-quality public preschool programs. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, members, I rise in support of this bill. I'm going to support some of the programs in this bill that we know work, like the Reading Corps. It actually has terrific results specifically for kids who might be at great risk. And also I support the facilities revenue piece, which has been very important to those schools in my district that were not able to participate in that before. And so there are some very good elements in this bill. And as a person who has been an early and a strong supporter of early learning, and I will continue to do so, I am disappointed to see that the approach that we are taking to early learning in this bill, and particularly in Governor Dayton's bill. One of the most revered and highly regarded advocates of high-quality early learning, who actually helped propel both Parent Aware and the Early Learning Scholarships, Mr. Art Rolneck, has specifically called out the fallacy in the proposal to fund universally, expand K-12 now to be pre-kindergarten through grade 12. And it is that type of one-size-fits-all a proposal that gives me great pause. And in fact, it ties the hands of our local school districts. Our local school districts are very diverse, just like members here in the Minnesota Senate. We represent very diverse districts. Our state is full of diversity in every sense of the word. And yet, this bill, as it's setting up to pair with Governor Dayton's universal pre-kindergarten, actually takes a one-size-fits-all approach and assumes that every single school district would choose to spend dollars for universal pre-K, when in reality they may have needs that are far greater than that. And chances are it's very different for each school district. And so I wish that as we go into conference on this bill, that we will be able to grant further flexibility, trust our school districts more, empower our parents more, so that at the end of the day, we are best reaching our students and making sure that they are prepared, fully prepared, to graduate college and career. So I will be casting a yes vote because of some of the provisions in this bill that I think some of them actually step towards that flexibility in a very small way, which is allowing school districts a flexible calendar year without coming to the commissioner. But members, that's a very small step, but it is a step in the right direction. So I appreciate the intent of this bill. I know that every one of us is very dedicated to make sure that our schools are best preparing kids. I am just saddened that we've taken away control from our schools and have, in a sense, or I should say not taken control away, but we have allocated money in such a way that we've removed the local decisions from our school districts, which best know their students.
Senator Bonoff.
Thank you, Madam President. When I came to the legislature, the connection I had between K-12 funding and the legislature was being a parent on the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition. I was actually the co-chair of the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition, so as a parent, we would come here by bus and we would lobby the members in the various chambers. And I remember watching Dean Johnson negotiate with then Steve Swigum around what they were going to do on K-12 funding, and thinking to myself, wow, that looks like a chess game, and our kids are kind of like the pawns on that chess game. And I said, I don't like that. You know, I am going to run for office, and I'm going to see if we can't do things differently. So here I am 10 years later, and now I'm negotiating about how we fund our schools. But I say that because when I was the co-chair of that Legislative Action Coalition, we would write a platform every year, and the number one thing we wanted as a Legislative Action Coalition was flexibility with the formula. And we would write it year after year, and we would, rail against categoricals. We would rail against anything that tied our hands with regarding the funding formula. So this session, I have gotten hundreds of emails from the very people that now serve on these legislative action coalitions. The Minnetonka group is CASE, the Wayzata LAC, the Hopkins LAC, and they write me these very same things, and they say, please just put money on the formula. And I write them back and say, I stand with you. That's what I want, because I've been in your shoes. But I know that if I didn't stand up and say that, they would say, well, then why didn't you say that? That they actually watch these debates because that's how deeply they care, and they wait for their senator to stand up and say, we want flexibility. And so that's why I'm standing. I'm standing so they know I haven't forgotten that I stand with them. I stand for what they stand for. And while I do thank Senator Uyghur for his excellent, outstanding work in putting together a bill, that my preference, and Senator Uyghur has heard me say this privately probably 50 times. He's probably rolling his eyes listening to me say it one more time, but my preference would be giving them, in fact, that local control and flexibility. So a thank you to all the parents who have been sending me those emails, letting me know where you stand.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam President and members. So I foresee a scenario, members and Madam President, that this summer, and after this, when this bill passes, and if the governor signs this package, with this sort of funding to the classroom, I know that I'm going to have parents, teachers, and the superintendents, Madam President and members. They're going to come to me, they're going to send me emails, they're going to meet me somewhere in Target. How come the music class was canceled? How come we can't afford shop class? And do you know now I got 35 students in my classroom? I'll say, I am terribly sorry. But I know I can tell them that, members, I trusted and put my trust in the teachers and the parents and the educators. I'm going to tell them that while Senator Uyghur had good stuff in his bill, that they are paying the price for short-sighted thinking and doubling down, Madam President and members, on failed policies and policies that are unproven. Simply unproven. So I'll have to tell them, I understand. I care about your concerns. I put my trust in you. But this legislature, and if the governor signs it, has put their trust somewhere else. And they care about something else more than your kids and making sure that they can keep music class, that they can keep the shop class. So it's been said many times, this is a bill with misplaced priorities. It takes away choice, and for some members to say, well, I understand, I've been saying it for 20 years, I get it. But you come back, some of you, and continue to vote for the same silly policies and misleading your constituents. In the end, the losers are the kids, the losers are the music classes, the shop classes, and the other classes that now have 35 kids in them, or maybe they can keep them down to 25. But you know what's going to happen? They're going to have to raise their levies. And I'm going to tell the parents, I understand. I didn't support that stuff. I supported the classroom, the teacher, and I wanted outcomes for the kids. I supported, and my colleagues, some of my colleagues supported ideas that work. So who cares more? That's been the thing for years here. Who cares more? Well, the proof will be in the pudding, because I guarantee you, members, Madam President, that we will all get those conversations, emails, and phone calls, and you're going to have to answer them. And at some point, it's not going to suffice to simply say, I'm with you. I'm with you. You got to look at them and say, you're going to have to apologize to them. I apologize. Strike that. Chamberlain doesn't apologize. Chamberlain supports a priority funding plan that keeps the money in the classroom, keeps the music teacher in the classroom, keeps those class sizes down. We support ideas that are new, bold, and will give the superintendents and the teachers what they need. So at some point, some of the colleagues here are going to run out of excuses. They're going to have to face those emails and those conversations and take those calls. So I'm voting no on this bill. Even though there are some good things in here, it doesn't hit the priority, doesn't go where we need it. Thank you.
Senator Herr.
Madam President, I'm going to vote yes for this bill, but with some slight discomfort. I'm one of the quieter senator, actually probably the quietest. I read an article today on the Pioneer Press that the quietest students are not learning, and that concerns me too. That's why I had to speak up. That perhaps we speak up, we'll learn, or perhaps you be quiet, but you just learn. That's the root of my message. But my slight discomfort is based on the budget cap on this bill, the 1%. It's not enough, especially this year when we have a surplus. I represent a struggle district and all sorts of disparities, especially educational gap. And there's an American adage that squeaky wheel get grease, and I don't like to be very squeaky a lot. I don't cry a lot but because I'm a proud American. But I'm not quite proud if we have shortfall in our budget. It's hard for me to face my St. Paul school district that St. Paul may be facing a 15 million shortfall this coming year, and so that concerns me. It will have job loss, and that trickle down to the quality of education, trickle down to student learning. I'm sure it affects many of you as well. And I recognize the hard work that Senator Uyghur put into this bill. It's a good project, the good package, got all the brakes lining up in the right place. It just needs extra filling, extra mortar, so it's bigger, stronger, tied up all the bricks together, making stronger fence for our children, our future. So at the end, I will vote yes, and I hope that there will be an answer. Strong hope that there will be an answer in the conferencing committee. So, thank you for your time.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I wasn't going to speak today, but I did want to rise and thank my friend Senator Uyghur for his good work in the Education Committee. We don't have a bad bill in front of us. It's a good bill, but members, we can do better. We can do better for our kids. We can do better for our local school districts. Members, we can do better for our teachers and our parents and our communities. And I rise today to really share how much I care about our students. We all care about our students. And that's why I think we can do better. We need to trust our local school districts, our parents, our teachers, our communities. We need to provide them with the flexibility to do what they feel is best for their districts. And members, that's why we need to put more on the formula. We need to provide our districts with more money so they can spend it how they feel best fit for their districts. Now, I can't speak for any other members in the chamber, but I can speak for myself, and I can tell you about the emails and the phone calls that I've gotten from school board members, from superintendents in the district that I represent in southeastern Minnesota. And the school districts and the superintendents and the school board members, they've said pretty loud and clear. They want more funding, they want more flexibility, and they don't want any more unfunded mandates. So members, let's go to conference committee. Let's do better. Let's provide our districts a little bit more money on the formula. Let's show our kids that we care about them. And let's show our school districts that we trust them and let's provide our teachers the resources they need to do what they do best, and that is educate our students.
Senator Ninow.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to comment one more time, and then I'll be done on this bill. But Madam President, I'm hearing a recurring theme in a bipartisan fashion. And for the members that are talking about supporting their school district and their schools, and they want more money on the formula, we had a chance to do that. I offered an amendment that said we trust the school district. We trust the school board to make good decisions. We trust the teachers to be able to teach, but they need the resources to do it. And the amendment that I offered said we trust you, and here's a little bit extra for those resources. Some of the members in this body here voted for it. Thank you. Most of you did not. You had your shot. And for those that are wanting this bill to go to conference committee and come back with more money on the formula, let me do a little bit of math for the members, Madam President. The House is at roughly 0.5%. The Senate is at 1%. The middle ground between those is not 2. We've all been around long enough to understand how this works. We find the middle ground. The governor wants universal pre-K. How do we find hundreds of millions of dollars to do universal pre-K and make the governor happy? And how do we find hundreds of millions of dollars to bump up that 1% to 2%? That's not the middle ground. That's not what you are going to get coming out of conference committee. We had our chance, Madam President. We had an opportunity to make this bill better here on the floor, and that was rejected. Why? Why that is, when everyone is standing up now saying that that was a good idea, not necessarily the exact language, but that principle of trusting the schools, of putting more on the formula. We had that shot right here, and it was rejected. Halfway between 0.6 and 1 is not going to get you to 2%. That's basic math.
Senator Sharon.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak. I am grateful for the opportunity because I serve on Health and Human Services Policy, Finance, Judiciary. These are all committees that absorb a great deal of my time, but it doesn't mean that I don't really believe that an enormous priority in my district is K-12 education, which this bill addresses. So the opportunity to speak to this is important to me since there really is not another opportunity for me in the course of the session. And I want to talk about how I hear the debate and how I'm experiencing it as it relates to my community. Just this morning I spoke to the school superintendents that represent the 3 school districts that are in my district. And I found that their comments resonated very much with what we're talking about here on the floor, and the bill that is put forward by Senator Uyghur for us responds significantly to many of their concerns. Of course, what we're talking about, whether it's in transportation and we're talking about having enough resources to maintain the existing structure, much less expand and grow new lanes of mile where our communities need them or improve our bridges, as if those are two competing priorities, and that if you support one, you don't support the other. That's a black and white conversation that only divides us and does not really express the complexity of funding transportation and the many priorities there are in that division. It's true also, Madam President, in Health and Human Services, where we seem to get divisive, that you're either supportive of seniors or you're supportive of the mentally ill, or you're supportive of cash grants for the very, very poorest people, or you're supportive of funding for Alzheimer's education. It's as if you have to be supportive of one or the other without the capacity to understand that there are multiple demands upon us, many issues brought forward to us in the area of of K-12 education from our schools that they've advanced. And this bill addresses many of them, not all, But I would remind this body that we're crawling out from underneath $7 billion of deficits that we have been resolving up until this year with cuts to these programs, whether it's Health and Human Services or the courts. $7 billion. This year we have a surplus, and we're treating it as though it's an enormous amount of money, extra money, when it really is money that just begins to help us fill in some of the huge, huge reductions that have occurred in all of these divisions. And so I am grateful that we have been able to do what we can within each of the budgets that are being put forward to us today. And in particular, in this bill, I share the concerns about us being able to put more money on the formula. I hear that from our school boards and our school superintendents, and I know that conversation will continue. But we've also put $65 million for school readiness for 4-year-olds. This is an important provision. Another priority in our state is to make sure our young children are prepared and have the background that they need to be successful as they move into the educational system. The early learning scholarships is another way in which we're helping early learning and successful development of our children in their early developmental stages. When their brains are absorbing so many things, we want them to absorb the right things that prepare them for their education. Then one of the number one priorities that we heard about as we were moving into the session was the school facilities funding. And that provision is, and the reforms, and thank you to Senator Dahl for working through this initiative and the complexity of this reform to respond to the school districts across the state. We have money in this for another important priority that we've heard so many concerns about our teachers, whether or not they're adequately prepared to be able to provide the kind of education. Often this body has suggested that it is the teachers that are creating problems in our educational system. I don't agree with that. I think we undersupport them. But in this bill, to respond to that priority that some have concerned, is teacher development money. We have career and college readiness money in this, which is so important from our industries. You know, our movement away from technical education and career readiness at the K-12 education is responded to in this bill, and so grateful am I to see that we also have made a commitment to making sure there's breakfast in the schools for these kids. There's nothing that we can do that's more fundamental to learning than to make certain that the children have an adequate and nutritious fueling of their bodies in the morning before they begin their school day. And then, of course, the school counselors. This is one that is really dear to my heart, and I heard from our school superintendents about this. Thank you to Senator Kent for formulating this, and of course, describing that how this resource can be used for a variety of support services for students, not just school counselors, but school social workers, school nurses, other kinds of support services that our schools need. So the experiential learning project that we heard from Senator Johnson is also incredibly important. We know that the ability to draw our businesses into helping us develop these curriculums and having our teachers be able to be prepared to teach what the industries actually need needs to be integrated into our educational system. So although I have not had the opportunity to influence this bill significantly directly, I can tell you that I think that those on the committee that have put this bill together have really heard of the variety of important initiatives, both at the local level and at the state level, that need to be the first steps that we're beginning to take to crawl out of the years that we spent paying for the deficit on the backs of K-12 education, on our children, on the backs of Health and Human Services, on the backs of our court system. And finally, when we have a little extra money, we're able to begin to take those steps that will reconstruct the maintenance of a strong infrastructure for education and other governmental services, and in the future, I hope, make more investment in improvements in this area. So thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to the committee members for this wonderful bill.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a tough bill to support. I think Senator Weber said it best. There are things to like and things not to like. We tried to make the case that the Senate should prioritize funding on the formula, Republicans listen to our superintendents, our school boards, our teachers, our parents, that we can do better on basic needs. Now, I mentioned before, when the Republicans were in the majority, we found 1% each year while facing a $6 billion deficit. And the best we can do now with a $2 billion surplus is that same 1% per year. The commissioner was in our committee and said 1% isn't enough, and then supported the governor's 1% proposal. I hope parents will look closely at the vote on the Nenow amendment. Now, members, I handed out an article from the Star Tribune that recently ran, and it says that the teachers union is the only major supporter of universal preschool. Art Rolnick, who is quoted and a preeminent expert in early education, said, "Why offer preschool primarily through public schools when we have nationally renowned private schools?" And he also said the teachers union should be the strongest supporters of these scholarships, not some nerdy economist. In committee, there was bipartisan criticism of the governor's 1% increase. I, like Senator Herr and many of the others that have been contacted, are being told that we're going to have millions of dollars in cuts. Class sizes will rise. Teachers will be laid off. All for a new entitlement, as Art Rolnick says, isn't needed. Now, that's not to disparage the public school programs that are going on. They're valuable. But understand, members, this is not just increasing funding to what we already have. This is placing new requirements, strings attached to this money that we are mandating down to local schools. We will be, and this is an entitlement that will increase union membership and put private preschools, highly rated, highly effective private preschools, local business people, out of business. This is putting money into the political system, politicizing early education, rather than leaving that money on Main Street. Now, I was on the Prior Lake School Board for 12 years. You've probably heard me say that several dozens of times. I served as treasurer during the economic recession when the state tightened funding, and we had to cut millions of dollars just within our district. And I saw firsthand how the decisions made at the state level can impact the local districts. And that's why I was so passionate to sign on to the Republican plan that we called Your School, Your Needs, that recognizes that our communities are unique with their own distinct issues, their own distinct values, and they know what, and understanding that what works for one district doesn't work for all districts. In contrast, the education budget proposals put forward by the governor and the Senate Democrats tend to underfund the basic needs of students while creating a large new statewide program and using accounting gimmicks to hide the future costs. We're witnessing the effects of this irresponsible budgeting right now. New mandates implemented in 2013 by the DFL legislature will cost our state an additional $900 million this biennium. We paid back $800 million in school shift, and when you take that out of the mix, it's a $900 million increase. That $900 million could have gone directly to lower class sizes. It could have been used to implement innovative new programs or upgrade facilities. But instead, the legislature must use that money to prop up the 2013 mandates. Once again, schools are left begging for money to fund their basic needs. Now, we believe innovation and reform can be successful when it starts at the local level, not mandated by bureaucrats in this building. There are examples throughout the state where schools have been successful engaging students and raising test scores. And if you believe that our students have diverse backgrounds and diverse needs, then you understand that a one-size-fits-all approach to education can't work. Decisions on curriculum, technology, and staffing must be made at the local level by parents, teachers, and schools in order to be effective. I have a real simple approach to education. I believe you focus on 4 things. You focus on student achievement, making sure we have great teachers, making decisions closest to the classroom, and that you provide stable and reliable funding. So I'm not excited about this budget. Again, there are good parts of this bill. Unfortunately, there are provisions that will pre-spend $700 million in the next biennium and handcuff this legislature in 2017. I share Senator Nenau's concern. I don't know, and what I've been telling my local districts is, as they ask for 2% and 2% or 3% and 3%, I don't know how we can do better. I appreciate the optimism of the majority, and I hope you're right, but we'll see what happens at the end of the day.
Senator Han.
Thank you, Madam President, members. Education is a big deal. I think many of us know that. Many of us believe that our Constitution talks about it as a core function of what we need to do as a state to provide for the education of the next generation. You can read in the article, or the Northwest Ordinance was written in 1787, the same year as our Constitution, that talks about how important education is for the success of our form of government, for good citizenship. It is a big deal. It is 42% in terms of dollars, 42% of our state budget, and it has been for a long time and growing. It's a big deal. For some of us, it's why we are here, why we're in politics, why we're in the legislature. Senator Pratt just mentioned he served on a school board. I served on a school board. I know Senator Uyghur did. I know there's others who served on school boards. I don't think there's anything that we do in this state that is more important than education. It's not just a government service, contrary to what some may think. This is really about people. It's about our kids. It's about our grandchildren. I don't think there's anything more important to a family than the education of their children. I think they will sacrifice, they will do anything to give their children the opportunities that they may not have had. We shouldn't lose sight of that when we talk about education, when we talk about education bills, when we talk about a budget. We ought to reflect those things. And I came into this session optimistic. We have a significant surplus. And I thought this would be an opportunity that we should not fail to take, an opportunity to bring about some real reform to education, to make sure that instead of just treating the achievement gap as the problem we love to admire, which is what it's been in the years that I've been here, every year we talk about the achievement gap, about how bad it is, how it's the worst in the country, and how the thing that we're going to do in the bill we passed is going to address that problem, going to solve that problem, going to make progress on that problem, and it never happens. We do the same thing year after year, and it doesn't get better. How many times does it take before we decide we need to do something differently? And I thought this would be the year to do that. We've got an opportunity. We don't have some of the constraints that we've had in the past. We should get down to work and look at how we can reform the education structure to make sure that more kids, and the kids who really need those opportunities, find ways to get those opportunities through an education system that works for them. Not for the adults, but works for the kids. And this bill doesn't do that. And that's been mentioned. We've heard a lot of debate. We've had some opportunity to talk about amendments that weren't accepted. I was reading some of the letters that the proponents of the bill talk about as they handed out to us as proof that their bill is a good bill. And here's MREA. And while they say some good things, they say the 1% annual increase is lower than what districts need. Schools for Equity in Education. Senator Uyghur handed out their letter. They're disappointed with the overall budget. The bill falls short in its meager increase in the general education formula. School Board Association. To meet state requirements and local expectations, our schools need an increase to the basic formula by 3%. These are the people who are being held up as proponents of this bill. I think that's called damning with faint praise. It's interesting to me to hear some of the members of the Democrat majority get up and talk about how disappointed they are in the target that was set and how they wish it could have been higher. Well, who set those targets? It wasn't us on the minority. Republicans didn't set that target. We actually had a bill earlier in this year that did have a 3% increase in funding. The Democrat majority set those targets. So if you didn't like them, don't set them. Set them what you thought they should be. Obviously you didn't, and I don't know why you didn't. But you get up and sort of say, well, they just sort of happened. We have this low target. No, you made that choice. You decided not to have a target that would provide the kind of funding that might meet the needs. And there is a need for reform to the structure. It's not just about spending money. We spend money on education, and we should. Don't misunderstand me. We should spend money on education, but we should also spend money on education with a view of making it work. And having a commitment to maintain an achievement gap for the last 10, 15, 20 years, that's not good enough. There's nothing in this bill that gets at how do you move the needle. We talk about moving the needle on the achievement gap, but nothing in this bill gets at that. And what does get at that? And I think it's the things that you've heard some of our amendments talk about. It's about empowering school districts who are elected by parents in their district, who are close to the classroom, who care about their kids in their schools, and they want to see those kids succeed, and giving them the power to make decisions that will work. And if they don't work, they can change those policies. And instead, we stand up here and we say, well, we've been elected to the legislature, so we're much smarter than those people who are elected to the school board, so we can overrule them and tell them how to spend their money. We'll direct them to do it this way. That hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. Let's try something different. But those ideas were rejected. So it's a disappointment for me to see an opportunity that we have had here squandered. And I don't know why. I've heard people on the other side say, well, we could have done it differently, but we didn't, but not an explanation of why they didn't do it differently. And so I'm not going to vote for this bill, and I urge others not to vote for it. I think there needs to be a do-over. I think we need to get back to the idea that this is about making sure kids have the opportunity to be successful. And we're not doing that with this bill. As members, I urge a red vote. We can do better in Minnesota, and we need to.
Senator Uyghur.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, members, for your courteous and thoughtful consideration and participation. I'd like to thank the committee, our Vice Chair, Senator Johnson, Senator Nenow, the minority lead, our nonpartisan staff, Anne Marie Butler, Bjorn Arneson, and Jay Wilms, the DFL partisan staff, Nancy Livingston, Caitlin Snyder, Dana Elling, Amelia Serling, Julie Barrow, Republican partisan staff, Ed Cook, to the legal secretaries that work in putting together the various amendments, Diane Vogelsing, Sandy Yanas Larson, Renee Rose. In engrossing, Melissa Mapes and Andrew Erickson. To the pages for the committee, Joe Kinnock and Coley Coburn. And finally, to the 4 interns, Rachel Baria, Alex Hollisey, Ryan Lurch, and John Hest. I know the importance of being an intern. That's how I started about 40 years ago as an intern for the Senate Education Committee. We all had a path for getting here, but it was that internship that was a game changer in my life. So thanks again to the interns. We have a great bill. It's all about preparing the world's best workforce. Complaints regarding the formula? It's my sincere hope that we will have additional once we get into conference and adjusted targets are set. I'd have a real concern over in the other body, and I urge the minority to please encourage their participation as well. I think there's a different priority. You know that we have substantially more in this bill than in the House. Can we do better? I hope so, but not at the expense of targeted priorities that have been listed in this bill. Almost all of them supported in a bipartisan fashion by you. The facilities reforms, and these are reforms, and it's all about equity for school districts, bipartisan support. This won't happen by just adding money in the formula. You need to target it. The vocational education, career tech, bipartisan support. And for Senator Weber, I so much enjoy going to Laverne and seeing the great amount of support. And I'm pleased we have that in the bill. That wouldn't happen, the project, by just adding a certain amount in the formula because of the amount that's needed. But we're targeting money. Millions go into career vocational education, and there was one of the speeches saying we're cutting shop. Really? We're adding to career vocational education. We're targeting that as a priority. For the counselors, social workers, others in school support, yes, we could put the money that we've targeted for them into the formula, but look how well that's worked over the years. It hasn't. Those ratios are very disappointing. That's why it's targeted. And again, it's bipartisan support. And I read to you several of the letters of support where groups did express that. And that goes as well for college and the schools, for the STEM programs. These are done in addition to the formula. So, a lot of discussion about the school readiness. And is this a new program? It's almost a quarter of a century in place. It's effective, it's flexible, it's proven and supported. It is effective. The Association of Metro School District handout, which does pitch for formula, I understand that, but it says school readiness is underfunded. And it also cites examples, I believe in Bloomington and another district. And you'll find this throughout the state, that this is an effective program with flexibility. The concern that there may not be space, a school district can work with private providers, other groups to do this. And we encourage these types of partnerships. So please don't feel that this is displacing or an attempt to displace a current system. Let's work together. The number of people that have come to testify on formula is totally understood. And I pledge to you I will continue efforts to increase what that target amount will be. I've advocated for this from the start. We'll have new budget targets, but I think it's very important that we keep these priorities in. One item that on the early readiness that I thought about when you said let's make it optional. Well, I guess when we addressed the literacy aid provisions several years ago, championed by Senator Jen Olson. Now, perhaps that money in literacy could have gone into the basic formula. No, you targeted that. We have a key benchmark in this state for third grade reading proficiency, just as we have a benchmark in this state for Ready for K. And we feel the best way to get there is providing programs that'll have effective results. So that's why it's there, and I know that the districts are excited about the opportunity that's ahead of them. I also want to say we are not in this bill advocating the UPK4 bill. Of course, you have the handout. Jeb Bush, he got it in Florida. But, in fact, look at the Florida Constitution. I don't know how you feel about that, but they have this as a requirement that's available. And so Early education is important. It's a strategy. It's a proven strategy to close the achievement gap. It's worked. We have a mix of programs with the readiness dollars, with scholarships, and over $11 million in additional funds. And doing that, we will create the world's best workforce. Madam President, thank you. I urge you to support House File 844.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will give House File 844 its third reading. Secretary will take the roll. All members having voted, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 39 ayes and 28 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.